we did not have an official ROTC at Tuskegee, but we had a quasi-military. Every male student had to take a part in whatever military training they had there, and Davis was over that. See, Davis was a West Point graduate, and when he came there, he could sit at chapel. He could sit 1 hour at attention. I've seen him do that. Just sit in chapel service, his attention directed toward the speaker, and Davis would sit an hour and you wouldn't see a muscle move. So he was trying to get the male students at Tuskegee that type of training. So we didn't, we could accept the responsibilities, and we would salute any other officer and we knew the process of dealing with the military. When the men were put into the Air Force, and they came to Tuskegee. I would say at that time I was teaching there. I was in the physics department. We developed a program as a student who was, the only thing he knows about an airplane is probably maybe over his town or one flew over. That's all he knew. And then you're gonna give him this darn thing and tell him to fly it. In 3 months, those young men came and took that course, and they passed. They took a test, and they passed the test. I always said to myself, that's the smartest group of black persons I had ever met. And then they went over into North Africa, and they were doing patrol duty, protecting bombers and the like over there. And some of the men were shot, some of them were shot down in planes, but not many. Most of them, they conducted and carried themselves well. I drafted in 43, I graduated in 43, and right after graduation, I got this nice little letter. I'm thinking I'm going to be put in the Navy, and I was going to go around Chicago. There's a naval base, training base up there, and I said, in the Navy. And then when I was at Columbia, and they were making assignments, and the guy looked at me and said, you go to Marine Corps. And he said, when he said that to me, I said, I'm not going anywhere. He said, well, all right. If you're not going anywhere, then you can go with that fellow standing over there. And I looked over there, and that was the biggest MP I'd ever seen in my life. I said, no, that's all right. Well, I'll go where you say. Mumford Point is, it was part of a camp known as Camp Lejeune. Well, see, back at that time, blacks were not in the Marine Corps. We were the first, not the very first group, but we were part of the group who were just going into the Marine Corps. So they put us at a little camp called Mumford Point, which was a sub-area of Lejeune, and Mumford Point was a camp for blacks. Yeah, and all our trained personnel who trained us were non-commissioned officers, and they were loaned to the Marine Corps from the Army because they had no blacks trained as non-commissioned officers because it was segregation at the time, and that was we just went. That's the way it was done. As it evolved, they finally said that blacks could enroll in the officers' candidate school, and I attempted to get there, but the requirement was that your captain had to recommend you, and that was the only way you could get to the officer candidate school. And I went to my captain, and he told me I didn't have the physical character. I was too small. At that point, I probably weighed 108 pounds, 110 pounds, and he told me, he said, you're not big enough. So as it would have it, at just about that second, a little officer walked by, and I said, well, look, wait a minute, what about him? He ain't no bigger than I am, but he's white. That's what my captain told me. I stayed there, put my 13 weeks in, and that's what, because when you first go in the Marine Corps, you'll call a boot, and they you saluted everybody. You were the lowest thing on the totem pole, and we ran everywhere we went. You never walked on that. A boot never walked on the base. He ran. And then I was sent to the South Pacific. And my first and only invasion in the Marine Corps was with Okinawa. That was Easter Sunday morning. And I was on that invasion, and they had us going in as decoy troops. I'll say it that way, decoy troop, because we went into the island and we didn't go on the island at first. We just went in enough to draw the Japanese close to the shoreline, and then we finally went in. We stayed on the island until we finally conquered the island. War is a tough thing anyway. Okay, but you'll survive. if you don't get that bullet to mark to whom it may concern, you'll survive in it.
I finished high school in 1946, and I was about to be drafted, so I wasn't going to let them draft me, so I volunteered and went in the Army for 2 years in Japan, primarily in China and Korea. I was involved in the Ordnance Department, and we were right after the war, and I went around to the different battle sites and collected equipment and loaded on ships, and then we took it back to Kobe, Japan, where we had a huge base. I think when I left, there were 18,000 vehicles parked on our old airstrip, all of which was being rehabbed as best we could, because the war was over, defense budget was down, and we were again in the same thing that I did at Brook Green, trying to make do with very little. But we did assemble a lot of equipment, and that equipment went to Korea in 1950. Summer of 1950. The Korean War broke out, and that was all of the equipment that was used there. I visited Korea once and China, because at that point they were concerned about the communists moving into China, into Shanghai, and we were removing equipment from there. Leftover, some of it was from the United Nations, and we were loading that on ships and taking it back to Japan. They thought that Mao would take Shanghai very quickly, but the river is so large there, and there's no bridges, and it had to be an amphibious invasion. And in training, the troops had gotten disease, schistosomiasis or something like that, and they really were hurt, and that held it back for about 2 years. So Shanghai didn't fall as quickly as we thought it would. I got out as soon as I could at the end of 2 years and went to college.
I was in a car wreck before I went in. Both of my knee was all messed up. Didn't issue me no gun or nothing. Right. So I went as a kitchen personnel. I went to, I think Texas was first, Arizona next. I forget some of the places I went, but I ended up in Hawaii. But everywhere I went, I had my people with me. The captain said to me, he said, the soldier, he said, I don't know what to send you in here. You make more money than I'm making. I said, well, you want to send me back home? No, I can't send you back home. So I had enough point to come out in 46.
The draft had been started, and of course I had to register for the draft. I was 18 years old. I was called for the draft, but they were drafting for 1 year, and I thought that I'd get that over with and go on in, and I talked to my parents about it, and they said, well, if that's what you want to do, go ahead. So I went into the service about October of 41. And of course, December the 7th, changed your plans a little bit. I stayed in the service until about, I got out in first part of 19, because I just missed a semester starting law school, and I had to stay out several months, but I went to law school in 46. I was in the Signal Corps, and I trained, of course, in the United States in Drew Field in Tampa, Florida. And I went, I don't know why they sent me up there, but I went to a civilian school, Coyne Electrical School in Chicago. And we went overseas, and I spent 30 months, about equally by 13 months in New Guinea and 17 months in Philippines, or vice versa. And I was what they called I was a ground observer, and it'd send you in areas that the radar didn't cover. The radar only had line of sight. You'd go in and on an initial invasion, and then you'd set up a radio, and you'd give a warning to a home base. With well, both. This has been a long time ago, but where enemy aircraft was coming over, or whether or not it was friendly aircraft, don't shoot them.
I landed on the beach in Normandy, D+25 day. That's D-Day is the first day. Right. Now, that's when the killing was on the beach. I was there. I landed when all the junk that was shot up and discarded. I mean, tanks and everything else, and men shot up and dead. Our outfit was 155 Hauser. And he didn't need that to start with. It wasn't the infantry. The infantry land on D-Day. That's day one. Mm-hmm. And but everything is piled in there in a small circumference. We were in England at the coast of the English Channel, and they ordered us to wax down everything. Car, rifle, anything, We actually, even the key in the cars were going, because he was going to hit the water, but we didn't know he was going to hit the water. We didn't know then. After we crossed the English Channel, and people talk about the English Channel, I rather cross the Atlantic Ocean as to cross the English Channel again. I was so sick on that. It's choppy water. You could feel the boat hit the sand like that. The minute it hit the sand like that, the gate opened and everybody off of there. I was on duty because I was a radio operator, Morse code radio operator. And when I could drive just like a ferry, going down there, you hit the sand, or the water caught me right here. You drive the car off in there. And so when the car going in, the car, you could feel it swirling around like that. And what that car coming on out there. That's the second oldest thing that I see, that's first day now. Wasn't nothing but balloon, or whatever you call it, what the proper name is, but just hundreds of them in that area up there. And it didn't take you long to find out why they were there. They were there because the Germans already know that they're landing and they're strafed. That's when I find out that Eagle they're gonna lose the plane, and that's why it's hundreds of them up there. The people you also ready to fight them, but they got to stay a distance above them, and each one, and none of the balloons was up there the same height. Keith was on guard right there. Guard is a dreary duty. I mean, you just stand up looking at this, but it's a duty that you know that is necessary afterwards, especially afterwards. But anyway, he got up from this corner where the car tracks go in there, and went over there on that side. He was kind of sitting on his duffel bag, because you have to carry it everywhere you go with all your clothes, everything you own. You got it with you. And he went over there and he tripped a mine, machinery mine for tanks and everything like that. The mine was planted on this side where he was first, but he went on that side. And he bootstripped it, and that thing went, oh, whoa, like that. It picked him up off his feet and he was out flat like that. I myself, because I didn't know him personally, I said, Keith, you hurt? You know to see whether it's hurt. And he got up slowly, and then stand up on his feet. He was standing up straight then. He shook himself like that, like you shake a limb on a tree. Took off. And didn't know where he was going.
But he was happy to be alive.
Yeah, he found out that he was in a whole piece. We made the push and break out. They knew before they went to Normandy that was a weak spot for the German. So when we started bursting out, we just went on up in the France. I mean, because you didn't find a fight, not much of a fight, because they were way across town someplace else, thinking that that's where they were going to be hit. Till we got into Belgium, and that's when the German, they were planning on driving us out if they could. And that's when they hit us. Their general name was von Rundstedt. They come and they put something on. It's pretty nice to fight in a war long as you going forward. But when you going back, you got trouble, buddy. Yeah. They put something on us, and they tied us up in a circle. We was in a circle. We stayed in a circle for 2 weeks. The weather was bad, cloudy, and rainy, just like most like how they look today. Couldn't get our troops down there like they wanted to relieve us. But the first day that sunshine, George Patton come in there with the 11th Armored Division. Come in there, you couldn't hear nothing, just fighting. It wasn't far from there, we had to cross the Siegfried line. That's a line from World War I. We had World War I, and then we went in Germany. But it's barbed wire, all twisted up, and you got the skill to get through there. But the soldiers going through now, we went through. And the first time, we were already indoctrinated, but soldier out there in the rough like that, you ain't got no good sense. First time we got to, two things they wanted, if they could, but we were in Germany now, if they could talk to women or liquor, then we start fighting through Germany all the way up to Berchtesgaden. Wow. Berchtesgaden was Hitler home. That's where we were when Hitler died. And it was lucky I could give the news to the troop, because that was the radio we worked. Have 11 band. And one of those bands was Columbia Broadcasting Station in the United States, and he could pick it up too. We just sneak and get baseball game or football games or the boys, so the fellow out there on the field can know what's going on. And so now we're on the way back. the war was over in Berchtesgaden.
I had an uncle who was head of the State Selected Service Board, and he said he'd get me in the Navy. Well, he did a great job. I ended up being in the infantry. So I told that guy I had a lot of papers in there. He said, move on. And the fellow behind me had finished the 4th grade, wanted to get in the Army, and I said, let me trade, and he wouldn't let me trade. So I spent the rest of my time at Fort Jackson on KP duty, and I eventually ended up in Japan for 16 months in the military government company. I wish I was a little older when I was there. I may have appreciated it a little more. You know, we were on the western side. We were directly across the island from Tokyo, a little town called Kanazawa, and it wasn't hit by a bomb. And so it was, you know, it was interesting. The gardens and the Japanese horticulture, I enjoyed. I didn't hit any combat, thank goodness. The war ended when I was on my delay en route coming home to go to Japan. Needless to say, we had quite a celebration on Paul's Island that night. I got over there about a month, 5 weeks after armistice.
Okay.
So I fought my war on a typewriter.
I was inducted in the United States Navy from Buffalo, and then I served in the Navy for 19 months. Then I came out and came home. I was in the service, but I never left the state. I spent most of my time in New York City. When I completed basic training at Great Lake Receiving Station in Illinois, they sent us to New York, Pier 11, at the foot of Wall Street. Didn't have any facilities where you could stay. So you had to go out in the community and find a place to stay and how much they would charge you, and you would come back to your commanding officer and tell them where you're staying and how much the rent is. And they in turn would pay that. And then all we did would come to work every morning. We load and unload ammunition off the ships in the harbor and ran guard duty at the gate of the receiving station. And I stayed there until near the end of the war. And I was transferred from there to Brooklyn. And at that receiving station, I stayed doing barely nothing but laying around until finally the day came that we were going to be discharged. The only thing I was interested in then was that discharge paper. I went straight, got to the paper, and caught the first thing out of New York and came south.
I went to Carolina, and let's see, I was there 2 years, and then I was drafted and got my chance to be in the Army and went to the Far East. That was during well, at that point in time, they were talking peace in Korea. They were debating about the shape of the table and all that stuff that they did for a long time. And I was stationed primarily in Japan, sort of on the ready in case anything went back into action, and enjoyed Japan very much. I thought it was a wonderful place. My brother was in Korea at the same time I was in Japan. He was a colonel at that time, and we got together a few times in Tokyo, and I kept him abreast of what I was doing. I was on a pistol team part of the time I was in the Army. I was on a pistol team for three-month stints twice, in other words, 2 different years, in competition with the other services in the Far East. And he seemed to be quite proud of that, because, you know, it took a lot of, the Army had a lot of good sharpshooters, and I was one of the best at that time, so he was real proud of that. I'd learned all that hunting and fishing on the Santee River. I tried to soldier pretty well, and I think I did pretty well at that. I mean, I knew it was a short-term thing, and I didn't want to dishonor the family or anything, so I pulled my load.
None of my family, none of my family, not as I can remember them. My brother wasn't in it, I wasn't in it, none of my cousins, nothing. No, none of my brothers. None of them was in the Army.
All 3 of us went on to the Citadel in 1947, and then the one that's 10 minutes older than I got an appointment to Annapolis, and so he switched from the Citadel and went to Annapolis. And James, the other brother, and I finished at the Citadel in 1951, right in time for the Korean conflict. He was in the Air Force, and they turned me down. I couldn't, you know, I had my orders to go to report to the air base, and I wound up in Duke Hospital, and they did not think it was advisable for me to go in, especially not to fly. So they said, well, they were going to put me in the honorary reserve. And I said, well, what does that mean? And the guy said, well, that means you won't be called unless we have a national disaster. So I have never found out what honorary reserve meant. I think he was pulling my leg, to tell you the truth. That was the end of that. I was sorry I wasn't involved in the Korean thing, but then I look back on it, I'm just as glad I wasn't. All my classmates that I knew who were involved said, don't worry about it, you weren't in it, don't let it bother you a bit, so you didn't miss a thing.
I love working for Uncle Sam. I love working for Uncle Sam. Let's bit, we're going a little bit too slow.